Hi there, and welcome to Mini Fights. My name is Brian. Today we're going to start a 5-part video series where we paint this. There were models in there. Alright, let's get to it. First thing we're going to do is open this box. And immediately from the get-go I see colored plastic, which is a little frustrating. I don't like colored plastic. These models are pre-assembled, which is pretty rad. Reminds me a lot of A Song of Ice and Fire from Cool Mini or Not, the Game of Thrones game. Similar style of plastic. I think it's kind of like a resiny, fibrous sort of plastic hybrid, what we sometimes refer to as Restic. One of the things that Restic tends to do is under heat, it tends to warp a little bit. So you can see that Shayle's got a little bit of a bendy staff. And then his big buddy there, Landslide, his kind of sword arm thing is bent down as well. At some point, much later in the video, mostly after painting, I do end up heating these up with a heat gun. Straighten them out a little bit. It works to some extent. They will always have a tiny little bit of a bend, which is kind of a drag, but that is what you get when you get this kind of material. The price point on Godtear models is pretty good, I think, for what you get. Part of that is because you're getting what I consider sort of a suboptimal plastic compared to a hard plastic. That being said, as far as accessibility, it's like a board game. You just open the box and play. And there's definitely some appeal to that, and I understand why they do it. So before I get going really with the painting, I did glue down, there's some blank areas on the bases, so I kind of added some more sand by using wood glue, just glued some sand down to the bases. I then took them outside and hit them with the old Rattle Can black primer, just a sandable automotive primer. Pretty much can use any kind of flat black primer, will be fine. And then of course we get into the airbrush tent, and we need to clean that up. You can see the areas that didn't get hit with it. We're just going to give these models a real nice coat of Vallejo black. It'll cover up all the areas we didn't get with the primer. It'll also just make sure that everything is uniform, kind of true black, where the primer can be kind of more like a charcoal color. And the next step is something I get to play with a new toy, and the new toy to me is Artist's Acrylic White Ink. A lot of other painters use this, so this is not something I've come up with. I actually saw some other YouTube videos and decided to give it a try. And basically, undiluted artist ink right out of the little dropper bottle airbrushes so beautifully, much better than white paint. No matter what you thin the white paint with, sometimes you get spattering and you just get inconsistencies. Artist white ink is so densely pigmented that you can just spray it. It's right already at the consistency of water. It really makes a nice, beautiful zenithal primer coat over black, and that's typically how I've been priming more recently. I've been just trying new techniques, and that's one of them. Now we're going to immediately go over all the areas that are kind of the shale, sandstone, whatever you want to call this rock color that we're going to use for the majority of these models. The rock that Shayle himself is standing on and all of Landslide are going to be in the same sort of tone, as well as the rock that the flag is made out of. It's called a flag in the game. It's like a little monolith that Shayle puts on the board when he captures or claims a hex. So we gave them a coat of VMA Olive Drab. That's Vallejo Model Air. And after that, we're going to go back with our white ink and we're going to re-add the light in specific areas. So we're just kind of building up white where the light would naturally hit, spraying from an above angle. The nice thing about the white ink is it applies, and it's pretty opaque, but you can definitely build layers and build more opacity. So you can really kind of build a gradient by adding more and more ink as you go. And the last coat we're going to do here in the airbrush tent and arguably the most important, is going to be a thin coat of Vallejo Gamer Leather Brown. This is a very transparent pigment, which is what you need when you're spraying over this sort of zenithal white you've created to make sure that that shows through rather than getting sort of deleted by the color you're putting on top because it's too opaque. The final step while we're in the airbrush hood is going to be applying a gloss varnish to these models. I use a Pledge Floor Care. It's an acrylic floor polish. It works just fine for miniatures, and it dries really fast, and it's, you know, not a nasty rattle can with, you know, solvent in it. I also realized at this point that I'd forgotten to paint the monolith while we were in the airbrush hood, so I'm just going to go back real quick and do those steps by hand. And it should be fine. It's a pretty small model, but it is something that added a little extra time to the process. Now that that's done, we can take a look at the models and see where we're at. I'm really happy with this so far. I think the airbrush and stuff came out amazing. There's some really nice depth of color on the models. Some really cool stuff going on. The zenithal coat did kind of come through. Now to unify the scheme on this little henge guy, the monolith, I am applying that last little glaze of the leather brown. And then we're going to get into throwing some wash on everything. We're going to take this wash and we're going to liberally apply it to all three models. I'm really just splashing this around. We're not too worried about using too much. I made plenty of the wash mix there, which has got a little thinner and water in it just to make sure it flows nicely. It's going to flow really well over the gloss. You can see it just wants to settle. It wants to slide off the raised areas to the recesses. That extra slick surface of the gloss does that. And if you got the time to do that as a step, it generally creates a little bit better results than just applying it directly on top of the paint you've applied. Now, interestingly enough, Landslide is a follower. He's sort of the second banana in this box. Most Godtear champions are a champion who's kind of like a champion from like a MOBA game. And then a handful of followers, usually like 3 to 5, 6 guys, something like that, that are significantly smaller than the champion in scale and in like power in the game. This is a little different. Shayle brings this enormous rock monstrosity with him, who's kind of the primary damage dealer of the two, and arguably, it's kind of 1A and 1B rather than 1 and 2 as far as power level. Because of that, I wanted to give him just as much attention as I gave Shayle, especially because he's physically bigger. So you're going to see a lot of work on Landslide in this video and a lot of the videos coming up. This sort of sandstone texturing we're doing to him is going to take a good amount of our time, as far as rendering it out, adding little cracks and things, making sure the wash lays in the recesses properly. So right now I'm just cleaning up the wash. You can see where it's pooled, and I'm just targeting those pools. And this is kind of a process that's a goalpost move on it. So as you're doing it, you might clean up all the pools and then you think you're done, and then you pick the model up again 5 minutes later and there's new pools. You just kind of have to keep an eye on it while it's drying. The gloss really makes the wash slide around a lot, so you're going to get some pooling for sure, but I find it's easier to control and you don't get the blotchy, like kind of coffee staining that you get on flat areas sometimes when you apply it straight onto the paint. And here's our end result of the wash, looking pretty good. Now we're back in the airbrush tent. We got to get rid of that glossy feel, so we're going to spray them with Vallejo matte varnish. Once again, you can do this with the rattle can if that's your cup of tea. I just happen to have the airbrush stuff, and the booth sits right next to my painting table, so it's pretty easy for me to just swing over and do this. This is where I think the rendering on landslide starts to get really interesting. I'm kind of taking this brown and I'm fixing up some of these areas where the wash maybe didn't quite lie properly, or it looks inconsistent, like it dried with like kind of a broken area of a line. I'm just going back and fixing it. It's pretty close to the color of that Army Painter wash as far as matching that. Additionally, what I'm doing is I'm hand painting some cracks. And this is not very difficult. I think it might sound harder than it really is. You kind of just paint sort of like, it's like you're drawing a lightning bolt. The brush, just by pressing harder and softer, will create different variation in the width of the line of the crack. And that's what you want, actually. So just apply lines that have some variation, make them kind of lightning bolt shaped, and you're good to go. Just play with it, keep the paint pretty fluid, and just apply little cracks here and there to your desire. And same technique is going to go on Shayle's giant tactical rock that he's standing on. It's going to be painted in the exact same way as Landslide. And finishing that step is going to bring us to the end of this first of 5 videos. We're going to continue at this level of detail throughout the whole series, so you're really going to get to see every step, and I'll supply commentary on all the decisions I've made and why I made them. Thanks so much for watching.